Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Let's dive right in. When you picture plastic pollution in the ocean, you probably think of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a floating island of trash. But what if I told you that's just the tip of the iceberg? A tiny 1% fraction of the real problem. The other 99% of plastic that enters our oceans isn't floating on the surface. It's sinking into the crushing, freezing darkness of the deep sea. This is the ocean's silent crisis, a vast underwater landfill we've created in the most remote wilderness on Earth. Today, we're exploring the incredible science trying to solve this sunken menace. Marine ecoplastics. These are polymers designed not just to be used, but to disappear in the harshest environment on our planet. But is it a perfect solution? Or are we trading one problem for another? The deep sea is an alien world. The pressure is immense, hundreds of times greater than at the surface. Temperatures hover just above freezing, and it is perpetually dark, meaning there's no UV radiation from the sun to help break things down. For conventional plastics, this environment is a fountain of youth. A plastic bottle that might degrade over centuries at the surface could persist for millennia on the deep seabed. This plastic gets there through a process called biofouling. Algae and other marine organisms colonize a piece of floating plastic, making it heavier and heavier until it loses buoyancy and begins its long descent. This plastic-laden marine snow carries immense quantities of pollution down to the seafloor. Once there, it's not just sitting inertly. Large pieces can entangle deep-sea creatures, many of which are slow-growing and long-lived, making them incredibly vulnerable. But the more insidious threat comes from microplastics and nanoplastics. As plastics slowly fragment, they are ingested by everything from tiny crustaceans to large fish. This can cause internal injuries, block nutrient absorption, and even make it harder for animals to escape predators. Worse, plastics are like chemical sponges. They absorb persistent organic pollutants from the water, concentrating them to dangerous levels. When an animal eats that plastic, it gets a dose of those toxins, which can then bioaccumulate up the food chain. On top of that, plastics themselves are made with a cocktail of chemical additives, plasticizers, flame retardants, which can leach out over time, poisoning the surrounding environment. It's this extreme persistence that has driven scientists to seek a radical new solution. What if we could design plastics that nature can actually reclaim, even in the abyss? This brings us to the promise of biodegradable polymers, or what we'll call marine ecoplastics. These are materials designed to be broken down by microorganisms into simple, natural substances like carbon dioxide, water, and biomass. The most common types you might hear about are polylactic acid, or PLA, often made from cornstarch and used in things like disposable cutlery. Then there are polyhydroxyalkanoates, or PHAs, which are fascinating because they are naturally produced by bacteria. Think of them as a kind of bacterial fat storage that happens to have plastic-like properties. Others include polybutylene succinate, or PBS, and various starch blends. The dream is to have the utility of plastic without the eternal environmental bill. But here's the crucial catch. The word biodegradable is highly dependent on the environment. A plastic that breaks down quickly in a hot, industrial composter might as well be a rock in the cold, high-pressure, nutrient-poor deep sea. Designing a plastic that truly biodegrades down there is the central challenge. So how does something actually biodegrade in such a hostile place? It's all thanks to a microbial demolition crew. When a piece of plastic arrives in the deep sea, it doesn't stay sterile for long. It's quickly colonized by a diverse community of bacteria, fungi, and other microbes, forming a living film on its surface. This community is so unique it's been given its own name, the plastosphere. The breakdown process happens in 4 key stages. First is biodeterioration. The microbes on the surface secrete enzymes that start to roughen up and weaken the plastic structure. Think of it as the first wave of attack, softening up the defenses. Second is biofragmentation. Those enzymes, which are essentially molecular scissors, continue their work, snipping the long, complex polymer chains into much smaller pieces, oligomers, dimers, and monomers. Third is assimilation. These smaller, bite-sized molecules are now small enough to be transported inside the microbial cells. The microbes can now use them as food, a source of carbon and energy. Finally, there is mineralization. Inside the cell, through their normal metabolic processes, the microbes convert that carbon into carbon dioxide, water, and more microbial cells. The plastic has been effectively returned to the natural carbon cycle. The heroes of this story are the enzymes. Different microbes produce different enzymatic tools. Cutenases and lipases, for example, are enzymes that naturally break down waxy plant coatings and fats, but it turns out their structure is perfect for snipping the ester bonds found in many bioplastics. A more recent discovery is an enzyme called PEtase, found in a bacterium that literally learned to eat plastic water bottles. Scientists are now finding even more powerful versions of these enzymes in the deep sea. But it's rarely a one-microbe job. It's a community effort. A fantastic recent study looked at a new bioplastic called LAHB. In a deep-sea experiment, it degraded remarkably well, losing over 80% of its mass in just over a year, while standard PLA barely showed a scratch. Researchers found that different bacteria performed different jobs in sequence. First, a group of bacteria called gamma proteobacteria used their special enzymes to chop the long LAHB chains into smaller fragments. But they couldn't finish the job. A second group of bacteria then moved in, consuming those smaller fragments and completing the process of mineralization. It's a beautiful, microscopic assembly line for recycling our waste. This all sounds fantastic. A plastic that feeds deep-sea microbes and then vanishes. But, like many technological fixes, it's a double-edged sword. There are serious ecotoxicological concerns we have to address before we start churning out marine ecoplastics. The first problem is incomplete degradation. What if the plastic only breaks down part of the way? This creates biodegradable microplastics. These tiny particles can still be eaten by marine life, causing physical harm. And some studies suggest that while they might be less harmful than conventional microplastics, they can still impair an animal's ability to function properly. The second and perhaps bigger concern is the leaching of harmful additives. Remember that chemical cocktail we mentioned? Well, bioplastics have them too. They need additives for flexibility, color, and durability, just like regular plastics. As the ecoplastic degrades, these chemicals can leach out into the deep-sea environment. Shockingly, studies have shown that some biodegradable plastics can contain hazardous chemicals in similar amounts to their conventional cousins. We could be solving the physical pollution problem only to create a chemical one, releasing endocrine disruptors and other toxins into one of the most sensitive ecosystems on the planet. Finally, the degradation process itself could create toxic byproducts. We assume the end products are harmless CO2 and water, but under the unique conditions of the deep sea, microbial metabolism might work differently, potentially creating unexpected and harmful intermediate compounds. This is why the term biodegradable on a label can be so dangerous. A biodegradable shopping bag was found to be fully intact and still usable after 3 years in the sea. This kind of greenwashing gives us a false sense of security. We need clear, honest standards that specify exactly where and how a plastic will biodegrade. So with the deep sea being so inaccessible, how do scientists even test these materials? They use a combination of fascinating field and lab methods. The gold standard is an in situ experiment. Researchers load samples of different plastics onto special frames or cages, and then use a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, to carefully place these experiments on the seafloor, thousands of meters down. Months or years later, they return to the same spot to retrieve the samples and analyze what happened. They'll measure weight loss, examine the surface with powerful electron microscopes, and analyze chemical changes. But these deep-sea missions are incredibly expensive and difficult. So scientists also recreate the deep sea in the lab. They use high-pressure vessels, essentially a deep sea in a can, to simulate the immense pressure and cold temperatures. This allows for more controlled experiments, where they can study specific microbes and test how different factors affect the speed of degradation. They also analyze the plastosphere itself using advanced DNA sequencing to figure out which microbes are present and what genetic tools they have for plastic eating. It's a combination of deep ocean exploration and cutting-edge laboratory science, all aimed at answering one critical question: what really happens to our plastic in the dark? The solution to this problem isn't just scientific, it's also legal and political. For a long time, the deep sea was a lawless frontier, but that's changing. The international community is currently negotiating a legally binding global plastics treaty, which aims to address the entire life cycle of plastic. A key part of these negotiations is how to handle bioplastics. There's a push for clear definitions and transparent labeling based on tough international standards to finally put an end to greenwashing. For marine ecoplastics specifically, the goal is to create policies that encourage innovation but also demand rigorous testing to ensure these new materials are truly safe for the environment before they are widely used. So where does this leave us? Is there a clear winner in the bioplastic race? Not yet. Some materials, like PLA, perform very poorly in the cold ocean. Others, like the PHA family of polymers, show incredible promise because they are made by and for microbes. The development of new materials like that groundbreaking LAHB copolymer, or even a foamed version of cellulose acetate that degrades faster than paper, shows that innovation is happening at a breakneck pace. But the biggest hurdles for the most promising materials are often cost and scalability. It's still far cheaper to make conventional plastic from fossil fuels. As we've seen, the story of marine ecoplastics is complex. They offer a genuine glimmer of hope for tackling the lasting legacy of plastic pollution in our planet's most remote ecosystems. But they are not a silver bullet. We can't simply invent a new material and continue our current throwaway culture. The real solution has to be a holistic one. It means drastically reducing our consumption of single-use plastics in the first place. It means building robust waste management and recycling systems globally to stop plastic from ever reaching the sea. It means continued investment in scientific innovation to develop safer, truly biodegradable materials. And it means creating strong international agreements to protect our shared oceans. The deep sea is not a void. It's a vital, mysterious, and fragile part of our world. By understanding the challenges and embracing a more sustainable approach to how we make, use, and dispose of materials, we can work towards a future where the deep sea is no longer a silent graveyard for our waste, but a thriving wilderness we have chosen to protect. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.